Hello, everyone, and welcome to the virtual event celebrating the publication of Indigenous food systems, concepts, cases, and conversations. So I'm honored to be joined by the editors, authors, and guest panelists here. So I'm so grateful to have here with us today to participate in this discussion. In just a few moments, I'll be handing the stage over to Dave Daniels to begin the webinar. But before I do so, I do want to highlight that we have a discount code available. So as you can see here on the screen, just under that cover, it is the code FOOD20 in all capital letters. And this will give you 20% off your purchase on the CanadianScholars.ca website. And that code is valid up until April 16th. So yeah, we do encourage you to take advantage of that great offer. We will also be giving away 2 copies of the book to 2 of the attendees here with us, and I'll be selecting those 2 winners and being in touch within the next week. We will also be taking questions for the panelists at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to use the question and answer function through Zoom, that little Q&A button on your screen, and we'll be going through those questions at the end. So yeah, without further ado, I am happy to turn things over to Dave Daniels, and I'll just stop sharing my screen now. All right, Dave, it's all you.
Hello. Is that me? Okay.
Yep.
Can I begin with a short prayer? I'm no snagging at the game, which have been unknown to be asking no mud said. We were the school I need what Kinoya with the question what a shop. Mishnah. Thank you very much. I always start my my meetings with a prayer. So let me begin. I'll have 5 minutes, 10 minutes to say what I have to say, and I can be long-winded. So show me a hand when I'm getting too long-winded. But I was 5 years old when my mother and dad introduced me to gardening. And what a way to take a look at gardening, and I've been gardening ever since. My grandparents were herbalist medicine people. They introduced me at age 7 years old to the standing medicine people to know all our medicines. So it's been a tremendous walk since then. And I would like to share a story, a 2-minute story. Imagine Winnipeg having 500,000 people. And over the weekend, in the next 5 days, a mysterious disease kills most of them, so that only 0.5% of the people survived out of 500,000 people, 500,000. That would leave 250,000 people, 2,500 people that survived. What it would mean in that particular period of time is a total societal collapse of every known structural system that we have: education, medical, security, transportation, economics. Everything would collapse. Then, in a month's time, when the world finds out that there's a whole bunch of houses available in the city of Winnipeg, there would be a stampede of people coming in to take over these vacant houses. Well, that's a 500-year history of our people, what happened to us as North America, to our First Nations people. And so we had a total societal collapse. However, we survived. And in giving that survival, I have an old nemesis that I used to say, give a man a fish, you feed him for the day. Teach him how to fish, you teach him for a lifetime. And in reading this particular introduction and this book, this phenomenal book, reading Don Morrison's opening book, short chapter, captured the essence of exactly what happened and how we can do things. We can reclaim our food sovereignty. We can have food security systems within our First Nations or within our people again. Now, bear in mind when I say that, I mean all humanity, not just First Nations people. We can recover our food sovereignty. If we're concerned about poverty reduction, then recovering our food systems is a way to reduce poverty. Because when you can share food with others, you're enriched by doing so. We can increasingly enrich our food by enhancing the nutritional content by growing our own food. we can minimize our carbon footprint, carbon dioxide footprint, by having less transportation costs across the continent from tomatoes coming from Mexico. We don't have to do that if we grow our own. And we can also have a whole range of our heritage food being preserved. We can also make our land more productive using the ancient Brazilian jungle technology of creating terra petra, which is a carbon-based sequestering, not a sequestering system, but a system that self-fertilized and regenerated itself and will produce 60 to 60% more food per acre. We can use that ancient technology. So given that we can do this, this book to me should be taught in schools. Our food systems, our food systems are indigenous food systems. We had that for tens of thousands of centuries, and there was no financing involved, no capital costs involved. We just shared and we just harvested what was provided to us. And we also transplanted foods as we needed them. If you look at our gardens, you wouldn't be able to find them. If you look for our granaries, you wouldn't be able to find them because we put them underground, so nobody can see where they are. There's evidence of that in Lockport and in Winnipeg. We had underground granaries that stored food for years. We used pemmican, which can last 400 or 500 years of fresh meat using our old technology. My grandfather broke his land and using horses, and he retired when he was 85 years old several years ago. So I'm now reclaiming his land and using modern technology to create gardens for people. We cleared 10 football-sized fields of brush to create an apple orchard that contained 9 varieties of apples and other fruits. We were using natural Saskatoons, wild plums. We have 4 kilometers of wild grapes that we find along our 10-kilometer hiking trails. We have a sand beach. We're now going back into fishing. We're transplanting medicines from different sources, from BC to Ontario, and bringing them here so that we can have our food systems take place so that we don't have to travel as far. There's a wonderful variety of gardening that we can do, and our indigenous food systems are phenomenal. And I just appreciate having this book. And like I say, I can't say enough about the authors and the work that Priscilla and Shailesh and all the contributors to this book have made. It's phenomenal. Thank you very much for the time that I have. Chimiwech, thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, thank you. Thank you so much for starting our discussion, getting us kicked off in this way. My name is Charles Levkoe, and I'm speaking to you from the North Shore of Lake Superior. I'm an uninvited guest on the traditional land of William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850, also known as Thunder Bay. And I wanted to also start this way because more than just words, I think this acknowledgement of the place I am, where I'm standing right now, really informs my own scholarship and my own activism that focuses on ways to work collaboratively to build food systems in a world that is more just and more sustainable. One of the many things that I've learned in my own journey is that we can't think about food without thinking about relationships, our relationships to the land, to the water. And this demands a serious acknowledgement in addressing the ongoing settler colonial violence that has worked acutely and systematically to disrupt and alter Indigenous peoples' relationships with the land in an effort to secure and maintain resources, power, and control. And this has become, I think, even more evident during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we've seen vulnerabilized people, so people who have been made vulnerable by our social systems and structures, who face very significant uneven health and social impacts. But I think we've also seen the ways that collective groups of Indigenous peoples, of settlers, working together in many cases, are fighting against the systemic oppression and calling out ways that food and systems of power intersect. And I think this work is really more essential now than ever as we look towards this kind of post-pandemic future and negotiate what it's going to look like after we all hopefully get our vaccinations. Is it going to be business as usual, or are we looking at something different? And I think this book, which I really hope some of you or all of you have had the chance to look at, Indigenous Food Systems Cases, Concepts, and Conversations. It really documents a lot of these concerns and challenges, but I think more importantly, it presents a really powerful, in some cases, first-person narratives, collective narratives of grounded stories of hope. And through these stories, the chapters really demonstrate that Indigenous people have not been victims and have continued to struggle to maintain and rebuild food systems through, for example, food sovereignty and self-determination. And for those who haven't really had a chance to read it, I just want to say that the contributions, when you get to look at it, are from academics, they're from community researchers, knowledge keepers, practitioners, and they really, again, offer a kind of range of personal and collective perspectives rooted in local, regional, and really international global experiences. The book is, I think, much needed. It's long overdue in many cases. It's an addition to the scholarship, but I think even as important, or maybe more important, it's a contribution to our day-to-day practices through sharing the stories that address kind of the physical, mental, social, emotional, spiritual health, but also the well-being of people and to the planet more as well. And ultimately, I think as Priscilla and Shailesh write in chapter 1, Indigenous people must be food sovereign to be sovereign as a nation. I have really appreciated this book. I've used it in my teaching, in my research, in the partnerships, people I work with, communities I work with in the region. It's furthered my own thinking and learning, and it's contributed to ongoing conversations and many of the activities among the communities I work with. I've shared it with communities. For those of you who came a bit early, you heard me, I was just mentioning, I've shared it with a range of people and different communities. And I'm always, maybe I'm actually not surprised at how well received it is among non-academics, non-scholars, people who are kind of living and working in a daily doing this work. And it really speaks to its quality and also its accessibility. And I want to express my deep gratitude to the editors, to the authors for putting together this excellent book, and also to everyone who's doing the work that I know the authors and editors are kind of standing on their shoulders to maintain and rebuild Indigenous food systems as an essential contribution to a more just and sustainable world for everyone. So my role in this very short discussion is to take us through the agenda. So I'm going to do my best to keep the time and keep people to time and let them know when you've reached your 5 minutes. So I'm going to just apologize in advance if I appear to be rude, but I am going to pop in at the 5-minute mark just to give a wave to folks to let them know they've hit their 5 minutes. But I also don't want to make excuses for, Dawn, as you often talk about, the tyranny of time that constrains us, which is also a product of capitalism. I think we need to think through and figure out how to get past that. So with that, I'm first going to turn it over to Priscilla and Shailesh, who are the editors of this wonderful collection, to say a few words. And over to you.
I guess I'll start. Thank you, Charles, for that very thoughtful analysis and framing of what we're doing here today. And thank you to our elder for setting us off in a good way to kind of remind us of our responsibilities and why we do the work we do. So I'll take a few minutes just to ask, or just to talk about why the book. I've been gifted with a lot of opportunities to travel the world and take part in the stories of other Indigenous peoples throughout the globe. That's been my life work. And I'm always struck and humbled and concerned about what I see in these regions of the world as well as locally. My own personal framework is one of a swampy Cree woman whose parents, mother and dad, were taken off their land after he served in the World War I. So he lost all his opportunities to, they lost all their opportunities to hunt, gather, trap, and be part of the land. And it eventually destroyed the family unit. So I write about that in my David Suzuki Fellowship report in great detail, because it really has put me on a trajectory of why I do what I do. I often go back to the community and I see the impact of Western development, and I fight like hell for my community, because as many of us in the book have identified, that, you know, it's really about land, and as Charles said, about relationships of not just humanity, but of the natural world, our relatives, the four-leggeds and the plants and all of that. So we're on a very dangerous slope of so-called Western development, where we are all being impacted. And, you know, one of the chapters I write in the book is about climate change, the impact of climate change. That's probably one of the most urgent issues facing us, the ones that focus on food sovereignty. And there's also this thing happening in Canada, as well as throughout the world, of land grabs, where Indigenous people are being forced off their land, sometimes at gunpoint, oftentimes murdered. And so when we look at the issue of food sovereignty, we see that really food sovereignty is an issue of justice, food justice. And there's certainly many examples throughout the globe of people standing up for justice, of reclaiming their power. Right here in Canada, we have a lot of the international workers that are brought in from Mexico, Jamaica, throughout the globe, and are really subjected to very inhumane living conditions. And I make this part of my teaching because, you know, a lot of Canadians are simply not aware of the origins of the food on their plate. So that's part of teaching the new generations about what are some of the issues. Finally, the book is a story of hope. The book is a story of mobilizing young people, many of whom are contained within the pages, some who are identified as professionals, medical people, professors, and others who are also professionals, maybe without the so-called formal training, people who really take the time to care about the land, the work that Don Morrison, and I could mention all sorts of names, doing to recoup the precious salmon. Very important struggle. And, you know, she's helped to do that by mobilizing people in her region, including non-Indigenous. So the fight for food sovereignty is one about land, about species. As we know, we are losing hundreds of species a day. And it's such a holistic issue, the whole study and fight for food sovereignty. So I think I'll quit there, because you know, we can take some questions. But in closing, I want to say thank you to the publishers. I want to thank my co-editor, Shailesh Shukla, who I probably only met about maybe 6 years ago in a course that he took my course at the U of Winnipeg. And we became instant friends and colleagues. And we said, you know, we have to do something about this. We need to write the book. And so he's been a very wonderful companion, a colleague to work with, so patient and kind. And, you know, the communities that he works with, people love him. And when he makes his presentation, you'll all understand why. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And thank you for getting interested in the book. And thank you to all the contributors for your fabulous work. And thank you for our allies who walk beside us daily.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. And I think this would not have been possible with each of you without your support, your help. Each of you, everyone, the people who are present here, Dawn and Hannah and Asfia, Elisa, there's so many other people, so many elders. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that I'm just speaking from Treaty 1 territory, the territory of Anishinaabe Cree, as well as the Métis land of the homeland of the Métis nations. And I'm also a guest on the territory. So usually it's very important that we acknowledge that who we are and where we come from. That was one of the teachings that David Daniel, one of the elder who started this event today, gave me actually. He's my lifelong teacher, mentor and learner. And my name is Shailesh, and as you know, this is not an English name. Uh, the meaning of the name is mountain god. And so when I came here, people had difficult time to pronounce my name. So one of the two elders that I work with, Stella Blackbird, and I really respect and remember Stella Blackbird today, and OG Cree women from Kisikuwinin First Nations from Manitoba. She said, how come I don't have a name from this territory? And I said, yeah, I would love to have a name. And so she took 3 years to give me a name. So Wabeshka Maingan is in Akaz Makwa Dudam. So my name is from this territory that was given to me by Elder Stella Blackbird, is White Wolf. And I'm from the Bear Clan. And I'm very, very honored to gain that name actually, to be honored with that name from Stella. Stella unfortunately passed away last year, but she's watching us right now. She's watching this beautiful event that is happening. And not just Stella, but many elders. I lost my dad very recently in India. And so, I mean, the last year has been very, very not so good, I mean, in terms of the events that is going around right now, the pandemic. But I think at the same time, the wisdom of the elders should not be forgotten. So I'm not going to talk about books too much because I think Charles and Priscilla already set a tone. But I would like to pick from where Priscilla left, which is a book of a hope. And I think we all know that this book is really a book of a hope. And as you can see from the title, the last section of the book talks about the conversations and case studies. And I'm reminded that we have been able to bring forward, and I think Charles mentioned that, but I just want to reinforce this, is that many of the people who are here are not, I mean, we are not professional writers, I mean, some of them are not from academics. So, I mean, it took a long time to really bring everybody to get together. There were community members, Mary Jane's from British Columbia, somebody who has not even written anything in terms of, I mean, so much wisdom, but not trained to write in academic settings. So I'm very, very happy to see this work as an acknowledgement to many people who had been provided to a voice that is coming from the land, voice that is coming from the water. And again, I would like to say something that I really remember, it really sticks to my heart, is that food is a material doorway to reinforce families and community in a sacred relationships. And this is shared in a chapter by Erin Gilpin and Mary Hayes. And I really like this metaphor because if food is a material doorway, then I think land becomes our greatest teacher. And then in order to then activate our relationship to Mother Earth and Father Sky, I think it is very, very important that we kind of respect and develop relationships, a kind of relationship that Don Morrison often talks about when she talks about the 4 pillars of Indigenous food sovereignty. Food is a divine, Annam is a Brahman. So from my culture, Annam is a Brahman. A Brahman is something which is kind of very, very sacred, a universal sacredness that binds us all of together. And again, I would like to borrow a concept that Don has used, which is a rainbow nations. I think what has happened and what has really this book has done marvelously is actually bringing rainbow people of rainbow nations to come together and then work together in order to maintain current and future of food security and also food sovereignty. I think it is also very, very important. And when Charles said that, we cannot be sovereign if we are not food sovereign. And I think that's the crux of the book. And I'll just stop here. My time is up, but I'll really enjoy working with all of you. especially all the elders, all the wisdom keepers, and all my contributors, and without which this would not have been possible. So Ikosani and Chimigwich for that. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So we're going to now move on to the speakers, the panelists, and each of them have about 5 minutes. I just want to encourage folks, if you have questions, there is a Q&A little click box at the bottom of on your Zoom screen. So you can write questions there. And if we don't get to them, we're hoping to have a bit of time, but if we don't get there, the presenters can actually answer those questions as we go through. So we can have a bit of discussion going on the side. But with that, I want to pass it over to Don Morrison, who is a member of the Secwepemc Nation and a founder and curator of the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Cooksham, White Hohuadap. I just greeted you all in my Secwepemc language, and I'm happy to be zooming in today from the unceded, beautiful unceded lands and waters of the Comasqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh people here in Coast Salish territory. As an interior Salish woman from the Secwepemc Nation, my ancestors, my culture, my people share common root words and political kinship ties, trade relationships with the Coast Salish people. My work here, I have a little, tiny little, humble little apartment here. I go back and forth between here and my home community in Secwepemc, where we're doing a lot of my work and just trying to honor and remember what my people back home have taught me about this topic and the way, just the long legacy of political activism that kind of shapes and forms who I am and what I do, and what brought me to food sovereignty. So I'm really honored. Thank you, Priscilla, Shailesh, for inviting me to this collection of amazing authors. I'm always blown away by the network, the Indigenous Food Systems Network, both across so-called Canada, but Turtle Island and around the world. It's really been quite an amazing journey for me to learn and to be entrusted by literally thousands of people to do this work and to share and mobilize the knowledge that I've been entrusted with. So that's what I'm going to share with you. I have a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. I get a little nervous with PowerPoint presentations because my elders back home used to have me drive them to places like United Nations and other big meetings, and they would see me taking notes, and some of the elders would say, if you don't know it well enough to speak from your heart, then you shouldn't be representing us. So, but I sometimes will create a PowerPoint just, so I hope I don't mess it up because I do better without it, but here it goes. I'm gonna share it. And it's not long, but I hope that you had the opportunity to, oh, hold on here. I kind of suck at this, but how do I get this into full screen view here? See, I told you I don't do this often.
If you just click the end show button there, it should bring you back to the regular screen.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yep. And then if you put play from start, see right under the home button.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, yeah, so for, I guess for people who have not read the book, I encourage you again, I'm really impressed with the knowledge, the sample of authors and some of the work that's going on across Canada and some of the concepts and the cases, the conversations. And I think it's important for me when we acknowledge whose land we're on, is to really truly acknowledge the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples. when we are in the ancestral territories of another nation, that it's really important that we consider how our work benefits them when we're there, and what that responsibilities to that are as visitors and as guests. And so I hope by the end of my presentation or by reading the book, people will understand it a lot better, kind of some of the work that I've been involved with as the founder and curator of the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty. We've just celebrated our 16th birthday. And throughout that time, I've really tried to honor some of the deep knowledge and wisdom and strategies that have been shared with me by some pretty amazing people. And so that around systems change mostly, like going really deep into the paradigm shift, going deep into some of our projects that we organize, and making sure that those projects represent that deep thinking. So we mostly, our work is about mobilizing knowledge and networks and really going deep into decolonizing food systems. And that's a picture of an example of some of the networks we mobilized in Vancouver for the Wild Salmon Caravan in 2017. We really work with the Indigenous ceremony as a way of knowing. That is our research. That is how we learn what we learn. Of course, we look at a lot of literature because we know we need to engage with the colonial nation state. So we, as Indigenous people, I always say that when we talk about mobilizing knowledge and networks, we're really doing double the amount of work of what the average non-Indigenous researcher or person would do, because we have to live in two realities and in two knowledge systems and be able to defend the Indigenous and validate it, as well as understand the Western science kind of techno-bureaucratic framework for research and development. So our work, we have 3 different pieces of our work in addition to the decolonizing food systems work. We have a wild salmon caravan, and that project was spawned, pardon the pun, at a strategic think tank that we organized in 2014 with a group of women in my home territory, which is my grandmother, the late Edith Sewell August, was from the Adams Lake part of our territory, which was at the head of Adams Lake was a village, Mamuch, and that was where actually prior to the Indian Act kind of dividing us up into reserves, we lived in, that was one of our main villages. And that is also on the home of what was once one of the most ecologically significant wild salmon migration corridors in the Adams and Shuswap Lake watershed. So as the long-standing, for thousands of years, the stewards of that watershed, you can see in this mural, the mountains. Our name Secwepemc actually translates to the people of the land where the water flows from the highest mountains through the rivers on its way to the ocean. So our name is in a really high cultural and ecological context. And so it's our job to look after wild salmon, and we have a lot of deep wisdom and knowledge on how to do that. So the wild salmon caravan was spawned out of a need to try and look at a different way to mobilize our people, because we realized when we reflected back on the history of Indigenous peoples mobilizing to have our rights recognized, living in the present day reality, there's different challenges, and it's gotten a little harder. So we just have to get a little bit more creative. So we really look at this as a celebration and a way to engage people through the arts and culture. And of course, observing our own knowledge and ceremonial ways of knowing.
But I'm just
Our
gonna give you a
Indigenous,
quick time wave.
okay, I'll be quick. So
Yeah.
we have the Indigenous Food and Freedom School. It's an emancipatory, participatory project that we are working with cohorts in both my home community, Nisconlith, and in the East Vancouver at the Strathcona Park Field House, where we've been awarded a residency, and the Vancouver Parks Board has accepted our vision of restoring Indigenous foodlands in the park. So it'll be an example of how a government can support this kind of work. We'll develop a toolkit from that we will share with our cohorts who are increasing their capacity to lead and be able to articulate the plans and proposals and live the reality of food sovereignty. So a lot of the toolkit will include primers and information on like dismantling, decolonizing, and kind of what does it mean to decolonize when we live in a fourth world reality. We have a vision of a just transition, and I won't go into that in detail because it's really just to let you know that our vision, that if you've read the chapter, you'll learn more about like the paradigm shift, the kind of some of the what does that transition look like for us, and our Indigenous Food and Freedom School will capture a lot of that in more detail. This is a picture of our decolonizing food systems framework that I wrote about in the chapter. And so we use this to facilitate a lot of conversations with policy, planning, and governance people. And I can, the chapter explains it. And I just wanted to end on this slide. It's really critical. We cannot have food sovereignty in Indigenous nations until we protect, conserve, and restore the last remaining fragments of our Indigenous, the really beautiful, rich, complex system of Indigenous biocultural heritage that lives within Indigenous foodland conservation areas, and in a framework that is informed by Indigenous law, because I'm not convinced we can do it within colonial laws and policies and structures. I think we need to dismantle that, and we need to change that, and we need to show a powerful example of how to create an ethical space of engagement to bring us back to the land, because we eat food, food becomes us, food comes from the land, therefore we are the land. So by protecting and restoring the land, we're protecting and restoring ourselves. So I'll just end with that, and thank you. I hope I didn't go over too badly. I know I always do that, but thank you for the opportunity to share here.
Miigwech, thank you so much for your work is so inspiring, and it's always a pleasure, really valuable to hear about everything. So thank you. Next, we're going to turn it over to Asfia Gulrukh Kamal, who's going to share some words by unmuting herself. There you go.
Yes, I always do that. Oh, thank you so much, Charles. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be part of this event today. I'm connecting with you all from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Originally, I work with the University College of the North, but I'm in Winnipeg today, and I would like to respectfully acknowledge that this is the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Inuit people, and it is on the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I'd also like to acknowledge that the water that we use here comes from Shoal Lake First Nation. Once again, it is an honor to be with such an esteemed panel and scholars, Elder Dave, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our editors and congratulate all of you, our co-authors, for this very important publication. Indigenous food sovereignty and the conversation around it is so timely, and we need to talk about it now in the time of pandemic for a number of reasons. But I'm going to first quickly talk about my chapter, which is my collaborative work with Opi-Ponapi and Cree Nation. It is their work. They're the one who mentored me. They're the one who taught me about Indigenous food sovereignty. So I'd like to acknowledge elders in the community. Elder Vivian Moose, who gave the name of the Food from the Land program, Idintumitzwin program, which is this chapter about all our Idintumitzwin program committee members. And this chapter is co-authored with Idintumitzwin committee. So it's also a work of the community. This story that I shared with my chapter is the story of strength. These communities suffered the plights of colonialism, residential school, in many ways environmental racism. And one of them is they became the victim of severe hydroflooding and lost their land, lost their food resources, lost their medicines, and many more beyond our imagination. And still they decided to move forward, holding on to their wisdom, holding on to their relationship with land. And we all know how lack of healthy and affordable diet is an issue in northern Manitoba and in a number of Aboriginal communities throughout Canada. Opi-Ponapi and Cree Nation is one of them, and they decided to take the matters on their hand. And they decided to create this beautiful food program, Idintumitzwin food program, where the elders and the community food champions comes on board and teaches the youth on how to hunt and fish and trap, teaches them about medicines, and how to take care of the medicine, how to learn from the land-based food, the health properties of food. And the food that they collect, they bring them back to home. They're stored in the Idintumitzwin food program office, and it is shared in a weekly basis with people who are unable to go out in the land to harvest food, whether they're elderly people, people who have diabetes, low-income people who are unable to pay for the gas to go out in the land, disabled people. So this is kind of the summary of the program. They started with no funding. Now they're receiving funding. But their vision was totally based on their desire to keep the relationship with the land and the land-based community. So this is Resurgence. I'm not going to talk about the details of the program model. I'm sure you're going to read the chapter and you get to know about it. But the story of Resurgence here is that what the program is doing in the time of pandemic now. They're working proactively to keep people motivated and helping people to go out in the land. So when they're kind of asked to stay isolated from their loved one, they can still be motivated by keeping their relationship with their land-based community. This is an important story. The community received the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund, and they are utilizing the fund for harvesting seasonal food and using it to keep people healthy. So what it shares with everybody is a story of resurgence and how it is related to Indigenous food sovereignty. Some unique characteristics of Indigenous food sovereignty, that it is not only a concept, it's a practice, it's a knowledge in action process. Indigenous food sovereignty is showing what we should do to regain our sovereignty, to maintain our land-based relationship in day-to-day basis. Indigenous food sovereignty is the evidence of strength and resilience of people who are kind of standing strong out there in any kind of crisis. And I would also like to say that the whole world right now is saying in whatever crisis we are in, whether it's climate change or the ongoing pandemic or food crisis, the knowledge and wisdoms that is within the Indigenous culture growing for centuries are the answer to this crisis. I would like to end with this beautiful quote from one of my elders from Mississippi Cree Nation. She graced my class a few weeks ago, Elder Stella Neff, and was sharing with us that if you think of 7,000 years we lived in this province of Manitoba, last 100 years is nothing but a tiny bit of our negative history. We can reach back to our life and we can prove people that we're strong by keeping our relationship with land. So at the end, the deepest connection of Indigenous food sovereignty with resurgence for me is the understanding and the practice of relationship with land. Ikose.
Thanks very much, Asfia. And I just want to again remind folks there's some good discussion questions and responses to the questions going on in the Q&A panel as well. So if you're, even if you don't have a question, you might want to take a look if you're looking for something to do with your fingers while you're listening to some of these beautiful, beautiful words. I want to now pass it over to Hannah Tait Neufeld, who is the Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Health, Wellness, and Food Environments at the University of Waterloo. Hannah.
Thank you so much, Charles, and thanks to all the presenters today and to Priscilla and Shailesh for the invitation to present today, and also just to be a part of this award-winning and beautiful book. I also prepared just a couple of slides, and I'll just be really brief. If you'll bear with me as I share. Okay, can everybody see that okay? Okay.
Yep, looks great.
Okay, good. I do this every week as part of my class, but it's still not very natural. So I know I don't have much time today, but I just wanted to share as part of the presentation today and follow up on some of the beautiful presentations so far, just some of the conclusions I put forward in my chapter, which is number 14 in the book on elder Indigenous women's relationships with food. And this is based on the postdoctoral work that I did that was conducted in Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe territories within present day southwestern Ontario. And that's where I continue to live and work, and where I'm coming to you today live from. So these are just some of the conclusions that I wanted to share just as teasers for those of you that haven't had a chance to pick up and read the book yet. So in my chapter, I suggest that all of the research that's going on these days, obviously I'm a researcher and an academic working in this area. Much of the research in this area on Indigenous peoples' food systems, I feel, necessitates an analysis of the root causes of some of these health and nutrition disparities experienced by Indigenous peoples. And I think this is really important to situate it within, some of these larger frameworks, as we've talked about a little bit today, because of the complex and diverse contexts that we're coming from. So I think that Indigenous peoples possess really unique determinants of health and wellness, obviously, and these relate to jurisdictional issues related to community self-control, self-determination, and sovereignty. My chapter kind of tries to get at some of the historical factors, namely colonization, also including environmental dispossession or dispossession of territory, and some of the indirect methods of dispossession, such as assimilation policies that are part of the processes of colonization, that are really kind of critical components of the theoretical model that I propose as part of my chapter. So I think that recognizing some of these historical factors, as complex and as convoluted as they are, really encompass and include all ecological levels, and are really aimed at working towards trying to address and pull apart some of these political legacies impacting not only Indigenous food systems, but I would argue also Indigenous food environments. And this is just a picture here. I just wanted to end with this. This is part of the work that I'm involved with here in Southwestern Ontario, working with urban Indigenous communities, primarily here within the Grand River Territory. This is one of our gardens where we grow tobacco every year. And we're known as the Wasaktuwinawak Collective. And just as a teaser as well, we'll be writing a chapter for the new book that Priscilla and Shailesh are working on, and to explore some of these concepts that I've touched on and hope to continue to explore. So thank you very much again for the opportunity to be a part of this book.
Thanks, Hannah. And our last speaker is Lisa Levi, who is Anishinaabe, member of the Chippewas of Nawash. Elisa.
Bonjour. My name is Elisa Levi, and I'm joining you today from St. Catharines, Ontario, the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. I'm here currently at McMaster University in medical school, just finishing up. So I'm really happy to be here and just listening to contributors from this book and remembering when I was teaching Indigenous food systems at Ryerson University, where I studied nutrition previously to being in dietetics. I was a student there, and food issues in my own community, being from the Chippewas of Nawash and the Elsipogtog First Nation. My cuckoo clock is going a little early. Being from the Chippewas of Nawash and Elsipogtog First Nation, I was always interested in food. And later on, teaching that course, there was a moment where I was deciding in what readings to put forward, and I just really wished there was a book like this at that time. I chose in organizing the course to have 80% of Indigenous authors and trying to find, 20, trying to have a mix. It was quite hard to find. So I think for anybody teaching a course right now, this is a good book that captures, from coast to coast, mostly First Nations, but it does capture a lot of work. So the chapter that I wrote was Indigenous philosophies and perspectives on traditional food systems, including food as culture, identity, such a long title, maintaining food security in Elsipogtog First Nation. This research actually wasn't new. It provided an opportunity to return to research that was completed in 2006. So it was quite an interesting undertaking because I didn't publish on the research as in completing my master's in public health. I didn't actually write about it until that time frame in preparing this chapter. And so it provided an opportunity to go back to a community and say, what was done as a result, and really reflect on why the research was done. And I remember, just sharing a quick story, I remember in approaching my own community and saying, I want to do research around food security, and providing all the background and all the academic terms we use and the type of research and all of that. And I remember my elders advisory committee saying, all you're asking is how do we continue to put food on the table? And that's basically the stories we talked about. And that's really framed within the chapter, leading up to a reflection on work that was done in that time period. So I think I just wanted to provide sort of that framework of where it came. And now that I'm presenting here in front of you today and reflecting on this work, work continues. And I think my own elders community had said that, and work that we do in Indigenous communities sometimes can be framed as a moment in time, but the food work continues. And I think it's been said by the speakers before me. I think about my community, Elsipogtog First Nation, and important decisions that were made politically to support Indigenous rights to fishing, hunting, and gathering. And one that was significant for this community was the Marshall decision. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that this week, snow crabs opened up in my community, and it was earlier than many years before. And the Department of Fisheries, in communication with the community asked for the snow crab date to be pushed back, and it wasn't. And we've lost 2 fishermen, and this is such, it's really heartening. And, as I just reflect on that, I can't help but think about that. Because, there's this treaty right to fish, hunt, and gather in our communities that we undertake. And while we have this beautiful aspect of Indigenous food systems, there's also this other side to it, right? So I just want to end there and say, thanks for inviting me to share this story. It's not my story, it's the story of the community, and food work continues. So thank you.
Elisa, thank you so much, Miigwech, for your words as well. We have a few minutes left, and before we close, I'm just wondering, maybe there are some great questions, and I'm concerned that if we open up the questions, we're gonna go way over time. But maybe I want to ask Priscilla and Shailesh if you have any final thoughts or comments you want to make. I know you've been looking at the questions and just kind of listening to people, so. Not to put you too much on the spot, but you are the editor, so I feel like maybe we should just let you have some final words before we close.
Maybe I'll start the struggle for food sovereignty is really the struggle for life. It involves everyone in the globe, as has been demonstrated by a lot of practitioners and theoreticians and others. And, it's critical. It's really critical. And nowhere is it showing up more critically than, of course, people who live in the margins, many of whom are Indigenous. So at the same time that this critical situation exists, there is this upsurge of life-affirming actions, some more organized than others, some very hopeful. It involves the continued development of relationship building, learning how to work with each other, holding academic institutions accountable. And I could say a lot about that, being in the center of one. So the important message to end on here in our continuing struggle is to really remain optimistic and continue developing those relationships and supporting particularly the generations that are coming up after us so that they will understand their responsibilities and really understand the depths of how much biodiversity we've actually lost. Millions and millions of species. So that's why I say it's critical. It requires all hands on deck. I teach it like there's no tomorrow. I'm kind of like this mad professor that feels like we don't have time to lose. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful for people, my teachers who came before me, and for the ones that are jumping on board and being part of the struggle.
Yeah, the book is doing exactly what it was supposed to be doing, which is, I think, the part of the conversation, I think right now happening. There's so many questions. I think each of the questions deserve a conference on its own. There's just so much ideas. I think there's a question about understanding Indigenous legal system. I think if we were to follow the Indigenous clan system, the bears and the protectors, and I don't know, I only know a little bit, but I think David Daniel is here, and there's so many Anishinaabe knowledge keepers are here, and they know the clan systems and how bears work and how beavers work, and how they have like sort of tight-knit interdependent system that was kind of already worked and set up by our ancestors in so many places in all over. And I think so. I think that this is probably just a beginning. This is not an end of this webinar. Right? I know this is kind of a weird platform to do this kind of conversations, but I think that each of these questions deserve a conference on its own. And I think we should maybe Priscilla and I, and maybe some of you, I think we can talk more about how can we make this happen more. I think there is so many young scholars I can see they have posed such an important questions. And at the same time, we have knowledge keepers like David Daniel, who has so much wisdom and so much grassroots experience working in so many First Nations, not just in Canada, but also in other parts of the world. And I think we need to establish the connections. I think one of the concerns that I have, and I think this is kind of a challenge I'm facing. On the one hand, Indigenous knowledges systems, and I think I'm an agriculture scientist, But I have always, since my master's project, PhD project, postdoc project, and currently what I'm doing is trying to do everything to respect, revitalize indigenous knowledge systems, whether it's food, medicine, and our way of life, everything, each and every aspect of our life. So I think what we need to do is that I think we have to go back and maybe have some conversation with our knowledge keepers and wisdom keepers. And I think what I'm hearing is we need to create this link between people like David Daniels, and there's so many younger people out there. I could see some of my students are there. And I think that is kind of missing, I think, in academia right now. I think we need to create courses. I think Shirley Thompson talked about a beautiful course that they are working, University of Manitoba, in partnership with Broken Head Ojibwe First Nations. We need to have those kind of partnerships happening on the ground. And I think we should have. Otherwise, I mean, David Daniel is not going to live forever. I wish he could. I mean, unless he finds an anti-aging or some kind of miraculous herb, I don't know, that is his trade secret. But I mean, we are losing these very important knowledge keepers. And no matter what we say that this is a blood knowledge, this will come back to us. I think we need to create a systematic and very, very conscious and deliberated attempt within academia, but also everywhere where we should establish these intergenerational teachings, streams continue to flow at various levels. And I think government should be supportive of it, not subjugating it.
I want to say, Chimigwech, thank you very much to the editors of the book, Priscilla and Shailesh, to the speakers who joined us here today and shared their time, and of course to the many authors of the book, many of whom weren't here, but who've written some wonderful chapters. And also to all of you who've joined us to listen and to be part of this conversation, some who have participated in the questions on the side. So to end, I'm going to turn it back to Dave Daniels, who will close our meeting today.
Oh, thank you very much for this opportunity. This food sovereignty and this food initiative is a worldwide phenomenon that's happening where, because of COVID, people are going back to the land and reconnecting back to the land. Permaculture, agriculture is a grassroots movement of connecting people to the land. The age of Pisces is gone. We now enter the age of Aquarius, which is the age of enlightenment. We are now sharing our knowledge, our wisdom, and our ways with an alternative to mega farming. In our Ojibwe word of the day is mashkeke. Mashkeke is a shortened version of mashkuizinake, which means the strength of the earth. So the food that we eat should be our medicines, and the medicine that we eat should be our food. Our strength comes from the Mother Earth, who provides us all. So with that, I'm no snanga the Benjamin, which Binamina no more as you are among what I was say, young. May God continue shop Mishnam, within the Mishnam, at the Mighty Budazwa. She may West Kinoyan dinner, I skip one and Chigarik. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm impressed with all you young folks, because you're all younger than me. I'm impressed with all the work that you're doing. Continue the great work that you're doing. And I've really enjoyed your book. And I'm going to be, like I said, to Shailesh and Lindsay, I'm going to be buying a whole bunch of books. I have this one lady that I bought 250 of her books, and I'm her biggest promoter. And I go around sharing this book. It's not cheap, but I do it out of my pocket expenses, out of my own, and I share it with that. So this is what I'm going to do as well with this book. I'm going to buy several volumes, maybe a box of books, and give it to all my friends, because they're all equally important. They're just not, they're farmers, they're agriculturalists, they're people that are just wanting to have this kind of wisdom shared. And so I am going to be purchasing a whole set of these books to give away. And with that, blessings to all of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much everyone for joining, and all the panelists for their amazing presentations. Just remind again that discount code is food20 in all capital letters. And yes, thank you everyone. I wish you all a great rest of your day.